There's this story I really enjoy about these two old monks, and they're walking down this dirt road after a huge rainstorm, and they come up to this big mud puddle. And on the other side of the puddle is this beautiful little girl, and she's standing there in a white dress and she's crying. And the older monk, he yells across the puddle and says, "Is everything okay? Can we help you?" And she says, "I need to be somewhere, but if I walk across this puddle, I'm going to get my dress all dirty." So the older monk, he rolls up his pant legs and he walks across the puddle, goes to the other side, picks her up, puts her on his back, takes her over to the other side of the puddle, sets her down, and she's off on her way. Well, him and the younger monk are walking a couple miles down the road, and finally the younger monk is just furious and he says, "You know we're not supposed to touch girls, but you did back there at the puddle." And the older monk says, "You're still thinking about that girl? I left her back there at the puddle." And how many times in life do we have to get 2 miles down the muddy road before we realize that we need to let this thing go, or we need to change our focus?
I would like to talk about the mind, body, spirit, or soul connection outside of meditation. How can we feel that connection? Jeff, convince me to meditate.
There's so many reasons why somebody should meditate. I think that, for somebody who's on the fence and doesn't really have a purpose yet and to why they should go into the practice, just go on to Google and you could do a search on the benefits of meditation. And I bet you would see a million articles out there on how so many people have positively changed their lives through the meditation practice. And, through the years, I've been so fortunate here at my academy to have over 26,000 students come through the academy. And I've heard over the last 30 years, literally hundreds of stories of how people have used the meditative arts to positively enrich their lives in many ways, helping them with their overall health, their mental stability, helping them to get through illnesses and injuries, or maybe improve their performance on the field if they're an athlete. I mean, there's so many different directions you could take the practice and benefit from it. You'd be almost crazy not to adapt the practice in your life. And so, if you just put a little bit of time into it and give it a try, it'll be one of the best things you've ever done.
Now, for the listeners who may be skeptical or new to meditation, how could sitting down and doing nothing possibly help improve my health or other areas of my life?
Well, first, something that a lot of people think is that meditation is sitting down and doing nothing. There's five different directions you can take a meditation practice. There is the athletic side of the training where we do to improve our focus and our mind body connection and our awareness so we have a higher level of physical performance. There's the therapeutic side of the practice where we can use to improve our health and longevity and work through injuries. Then there is the medical side of the practice, and all of Chinese medicine is based off of Qigong theory, which is a meditative art. Then there's the philosophical side of the practice, and then also the spiritual side of the practice. Now, following any one of these five paths, there's multiple different ways that we can use the meditative arts through movement practices like Tai Chi or Qigong or walking meditation or yoga. There's sitting practices that we can do with, very relaxed breathing techniques or very aggressive techniques, using it with different energetic circulations in the body. There's standing meditation, walking meditation, many different forms of breath work. There's so many different avenues that we can use when we're looking to build an evolving life practice with the meditative arts. And it's not just sitting and doing nothing. There's many different things that we can do. And the trick is understanding the science behind these practices so we incorporate the right practices to help us reach the benefits that we're looking to achieve.
What are you doing when you're doing these different meditations? I've seen you demonstrate the standing meditation. And so clearly, and there's the walking meditation, like you mentioned. So clearly you don't need to be still in your body, but what's happening in your mind? What do you need to be doing when you're meditating for it to be effective?
There's so many different things. That's a pretty open-ended question because we practice meditation to get different outcomes. And with any kind of a meditative practice, we have five underlying principles and foundational developmental areas that we focus on to help build up our awareness in the meditative arts. And I call these the five regulations. They are regulating the body, regulating the breath, regulating the mind, regulating the energy, and regulating the spirit. And briefly, I'll kind of talk about what those five regulations are so you understand what I'm saying here. So, with regulating the body, this is the easiest one to see some pretty immediate results. And it basically is paying attention to your skeletal alignment, your muscular structure, and how we're holding tension in the body. And an example would be if you've ever been sitting at your computer for 3 or 4 hours and your shoulders are rounded forward and you start feeling lethargic and maybe your neck's getting sore. And then think of another time when the most important person in your world walks in the room and your body perks up and you feel like you're on top of the world. Well, these two different energetic states we're in 100% control of all day, every day. And this is kind of the basic idea of regulating the body. And a little bit deeper level would be how are we maintaining some sort of muscular structure in the body and flexibility? What kind of diet are we eating to maintain our energy levels? And then lastly, how much sleep are we getting to maintain a healthy state of mind throughout the day? And so all of these things are part of what we call regulating the body. Now, the second regulation is regulating the breath. Regulating the breath is a very deep topic, and it's something that if you take on the meditative practice, you'll be doing for the rest of your life. The idea with regulating the breath is we want to understand why we're doing these different practices. And in Qigong, they often refer to defining Qigong as the science of the breath because there's literally hundreds of different breathing strategies and we can use them to get different physical, mental, and emotional outcomes. So for example, we kind of broadly categorize these breathing strategies into yin methods and yang methods. Yin methods are often deeper, more holistic style of meditations that we do to bring the energy inward. And an example of a yin breath would be if you ever listen to somebody sleep, their natural breathing pattern is a longer inhale and a shorter exhale. And this is the body's natural way of bringing the conscious mind into the subconscious mind, which is where we are when we're sleeping and dreaming. So, if we want to emulate this style of energetic expression in our meditation practice, we can do longer inhales, soft retentions at the end of the inhale, and shorter exhales. And this helps bring that energy inward, which is great for stress reduction, dealing with anxiety or panic attacks. It's great for boosting your creativity. There's many reasons why we would do this yin side of the breath. Then we have the yang practices or the more aggressive breathing strategies. And an example of that would be if you've ever had to push your car, or maybe you pick up something heavy, your natural instinct is to use your exhale and maybe put tension in the breath, maybe make it audible. And this helps generate energy and power, which gives us strength. Now, when we understand how to use these sides of the breath strategically, and in Chinese philosophy, they call this balancing the kan and li, or the water and fire. Now we have the tools to adjust our physical, mental, and emotional states throughout the day. And this is a very powerful part of the practice, understanding the breath. Then the third regulation is regulating the mind. And regulating the mind, as with the breath, is a very deep practice and something that you will be working with for the rest of your life. One of the most common things I hear people say with meditation is that I've tried meditation before, but it just didn't work for me. I couldn't quiet my mind. Somewhere along the way, people got this misguided idea that in order to be good at meditation, you have to reach this state of nirvana and this blissful place where nothing bothers you. And, that couldn't be further from the truth. I've been spending the last 36 years of my life studying the meditative arts, and I've been fortunate enough to train with some really amazing teachers all over the world, and I have never once met anybody who doesn't get distracted. We all do. And so when you're doing a practice, whether it's a movement practice or a sitting practice, and you're doing this for 20 minutes, you may get distracted 50 times. Well, every time you get distracted, we use our posture, our breath, maybe the movement if it's a movement practice, to help bring us back to center. And now we just got 50 repetitions of being distracted and finding our focus. And if you do this every day, every month, every year, you start to develop this power and this ability that no matter what happens to you, whether somebody's saying something to throw you off your game or you have a bad day at work, you're able to come back and focus and let those distractions fade away. And so this is very powerful. There's this story I really enjoy about these two old monks, and they're walking down this dirt road after a huge rainstorm, and they come up to this big mud puddle. And on the other side of the puddle is this beautiful little girl, and she's standing there in a white dress and she's crying. And the older monk, he yells across the puddle and says, "Is everything okay? Can we help you?" And she says, "I need to be somewhere, but if I walk across this puddle, I'm going to get my dress all dirty." So the older monk, he rolls up his pant legs and he walks across the puddle, goes to the other side, picks her up, puts her on his back, takes her over to the other side of the puddle, sets her down, and she's off on her way. Well, him and the younger monk are walking a couple miles down the road, and finally the younger monk is just furious and he says, "You know we're not supposed to touch girls, but you did back there at the puddle." And the older monk says, "You're still thinking about that girl? I left her back there at the puddle." And how many times in life do we have to get 2 miles down the muddy road before we realize that we need to let this thing go or we need to change our focus? And so regulating the mind is extremely powerful and just one of the foundational ideas of the meditative practice. Then the fourth regulation is regulating the energy. Regulating the energy is an extremely deep topic and something that we could literally talk for hours about. But to just give you a brief idea, once you've reached a competent level in regulating the body, the breath, and the mind, you now have the tools to regulate the energy in the body and lead it inward, extend it outward, or circulate it in the body, which will help aid us with different meditation practices that we're doing to get different energetic expressions. And so, this is also an extremely important part of developing your meditation practice. And then the last regulation, which is regulating the spirit, is a very profound idea. And it's something that monks and meditation masters will spend their entire life's journey working towards that stage of enlightenment. But it doesn't matter what meditation practice you take on, if you cultivate these five underlying principles that are the basic foundation of any meditation practice, you can easily see how it can affect everything you do in life.
So these five regulation principles are things that you adopt and cultivate through a meditation practice, or you need to adopt these and then that helps with your meditation practice.
They're part of your meditation journey. So when you're studying the meditative arts and building a life practice around the meditation idea, is we're cultivating ritual practices, active practices, and philosophical practices. And what I mean by ritual practice is it's where you set time aside every day and you shut off the cell phones, you shut off the audios, you're not listening to any apps or watching any videos. You're just turning your focus inside. Then we have active practices, which are things that we can do when you're walking down the street or standing in line at the grocery store. And these things are great because they help us be able to maintain that level of awareness and focus in everything we do throughout the day because, it makes no sense to practice our meditation every morning and feel in this great relaxed place. And then the whole rest of the day, we're stressed out and anxious. So these active practices kind of help us maintain that level of awareness throughout the day. And then we have the philosophical practices that can be intertwined into both the active and the ritual based practices. So, as you're building an evolving life practice with these meditative arts, these five regulations or these underlying principles are part of your development that help enrich your meditation and your life.
Is there a certain amount of time that you recommend specifically that people set aside for this daily practice? I know different teachers and gurus have a sweet spot when it comes to how many minutes you should really set aside to sit down and meditate.
I always tell new students to start small. And so I usually recommend having them do a 20-minute a day ritual practice and then integrating active practices. And active practices, as I mentioned, can be done in as little as 60 seconds. They can be done when you're walking down the street. And so these things we can do. I usually tell newer students until they're in the habit of doing this to just set an alarm on their phone to go off every 60 or 90 minutes. And then when that happens, do one of these active practices. And an example of what I mean by an active practice could be as simple as just counting out 10 deep breaths while you're not focusing on anything else. And there's many different practices that we can do. And as you start learning the science behind the breath, you might use a yin style breath if you're feeling stressed out, or if you're feeling depleted, a yang style breath to help energize you. And so these active practices play a role in how we adjust our physical, mental, and emotional states throughout the day.
What's the story behind your introduction to meditation? How did you get involved and interested in this?
You know, it's a bit of a roundabout story in that I wasn't looking to get into the meditative arts, and in fact, I was not interested at all. I was a very young guy. I was 19 years old. I used to very much be into Western boxing. I love the thrill of the sport and the strategy behind it and the challenge. And I used to go to a boxing gym just a few blocks down the street here from my academy, and at a boxing gym, if you're not familiar with it, it's run a lot different than your traditional style fitness classes where there's a teacher running a group of students. Usually, in an old school boxing gym, there might be as many as 4 or 5 coaches running around, and each one of those coaches has 3, 4, or 5 fighters that they're working with. Now, once they have those fighters, they spend all their time with them, they focus on them, and they help prep them for events coming up. Well, at this one particular gym, one of the coaches that was there was a very well-known, respected coach. He had created a lot of champions on both the amateur and professional level. And I really wanted to get to spend some time with him, but his card was full and he really didn't have any space to take on any new fighters or competitors. And so I would always show up at the gym when I knew he was going to be there and try to get him to notice me. I'd work really hard, I'd be there every day. And finally, after following him around for about 3 or 4 months, he started giving me some pointers and helping me out a little bit. And then it was only maybe 2 or 3 weeks of getting to work with him when he said something to me that changed my life forever. And that he said, if you really want to be a good boxer, you should start doing meditation and Tai Chi. Now, at the time, I'm this 19-year-old kid thinking Tai Chi is for old people in the park. How's that going to help me be a better fighter? But I started doing the practice, and not only has it changed my life in many ways, I mentioned I've had many students come through the academy through the years, and I've seen hundreds of people just positively transform their lives through the practice. And so that's what's given me the fuel and the energy to, write my last couple books and create my online program and my teacher training program and just trying to get the word out there of, how these practices can enrich your life.
I'm going to read one of the book reviews that you have on Amazon for The Yielding Warrior, which is the book that you authored. It says the yielding warrior is not only good for those interested in martial arts, but the principles can also be used in this busy and stressful world. Jeff Patterson teaches how to enhance your life with realistic, easy to understand guidance in the ancient technique of yielding awareness. What is yielding awareness?
Yielding is a very interesting idea, and it's a philosophical concept used in the meditative and martial arts, and something I've been very passionate about for many years. And in the book that you're referring to, The Yielding Warrior, I break yielding down into three main pillars. We have physical yielding, mental yielding, and emotional yielding. Physical yielding is the easiest one to understand, and it's the idea that, I push you, you push me, whoever's the bigger, stronger person with the most leverage eventually is going to push the other person over. But with yielding, instead of us trying to see who the bigger meathead is, when you push me, I get out of the way of that force so I can respond with less effort. So I'm not having to try to butt heads with you and see if I'm bigger and stronger than you. Now, it's obvious to see how this could be beneficial in any kind of athletics because there's no controlling the size of your opponent that you come up against, whether you're playing football or basketball or some kind of a uh, more of a combative sport. And so if you get somebody that's bigger and stronger than you have to learn how to deal with that and redirect that energy. And in order to be good at physical yielding, a lot of things have to come into play. You need to be well rooted. The lower part of your body needs to be strong and flexible so you can change your central equilibrium without getting tight. The body has to be relaxed, the breath has to be calm, and the mind has to be present. And while it may be a lifetime journey to really master these skills, from day one of bringing meditation into your life, you start to develop this sense of awareness and this ability to see those things inside yourself. And once we have a clear vision of those things inside of ourselves, we also start to see them more clearly in other people. And this is where it becomes very interesting. And now we're moving into what I call mental yielding. Mental yielding is the idea that, say, you and I are having a conversation, and I say something that unsettles you, and I pick up on it right from that first sign of imbalance. At this point, it's a lot easier to adjust the conversation and keep us in a happy place than if I'm not paying attention to that. And pretty soon I'm so far off track, you want to knock me upside the head. And so, learning how to use yielding in all of our interactions is extremely powerful. One, we're being more considerate, which is something that we could all do more of. And two, it allows us to be strategic and guide the conversation to a positive outcome with the least amount of resistance. And this is beneficial in our relationships, in business, in sales, negotiations. And there's so many different ways that we can apply this idea. Then we have what we call emotional yielding. And emotional yielding is very much like mental yielding, but with your own interpersonal conflicts. So you think about oftentimes something will happen to us and we'll respond and we'll go down this path. And we might get an hour, a day, a week down that road and realize maybe that wasn't the best choice. But with yielding, if we could have taken a step back and been more present and more balanced in our reaction, we could have analyzed the scenario and not let the emotions get involved, be more centered, and often make a more educated choice on how we want to respond to the situation, which can save us a lot of heartache on the other side. And so, I've been explaining this idea of yielding now for many years. I've been running my academy for over 30 years now. And one of the most common things I'll hear people say is yielding makes a lot of sense. In fact, I think I use yielding all the time. Well, I would agree in that I think everybody uses some degree of yielding all the time, whether they understand the definition of the term or not. However, it's kind of like if you or I were to walk into a crime scene with a detective who's been on the job for 30 years. I guarantee you that person would see things about the series of events and the timeline that I know at least I would have no clue of. And the meditative arts helps us see things inside of ourselves and inside of other people that I truly believe if you don't adapt meditation into your life, you'll never see these things with as much clarity as somebody who does.
Mm. The first thing I picture is yielding in a driving pattern and like a roundabout with cars. And then as you're talking about yielding and in everyday life with people and walking into a crime scene and you're yielding, to the person with the more experience, can you yield to yourself if you're having different thoughts that are kind of at ends with each other and yield to the one? I mean, do you yield to yourself at all? Is that
Yeah.
possible?
Yes, and that would be an example of emotional yielding. So when we understand how to recognize these imbalances, and here's a key in yielding, and the reason why meditation helps us with our yielding skills is that it gives us the ability to recognize these imbalances or maybe these internal conflicts that we may have at the first sign of imbalance, because it's very difficult if you've been in an argument or maybe even just within in an argument within yourself or confrontation and something that you're trying to deal with or come to grips with, and you've been frustrating and stressing over it for days. It's hard at that point to let it go. But if you recognize that imbalance when it first happens and understand it for what it is and say, hey, I could keep following that negative path and think about all of the other negative things that make that change worse. Or I can think, okay, this is where I am. This is the negative thing I have to overcome. What are all of my options and my choices to lead this down a positive path? And so you have the ability in the beginning to make a lot easier shift than after we've been too far down that negative path. It's kind of like, if you've ever been into an argument with somebody, if you get to excuse me, if you get to that emotional state where you are excited and upset and whatever, it's very difficult to kind of turn that down and bring that back to a relaxed place. And so, this idea of being able to recognize these shifts and these changes comes from that consistency through meditation and doing a little bit every day and learning how to regulate the mind so we see these things with more clarity.
It sort of sounds like letting go of control or even submitting.
A lot of people, when they hear yielding, they think that the first thing they think of is giving up. And, teaching martial arts for so many years, it's funny because you'll get like these type A personalities that come in and they're very aggressive and focused and they hear the term yielding and they're like, I don't want to yield, that's giving up, and yielding is very far from giving up. Yielding is being strategic and having you get the outcome that you want with the least amount of effort. Yielding has been used in military battles for hundreds of years, and it's helped smaller armies overcome larger armies, multiple scenarios. And this idea of understanding how to use yielding, if it was giving up, it would never work in battle, right? So the idea is we're being strategic about how we spend our energy rather than burning it out on something that's not getting us anywhere. And so yielding can be very effective in multiple different scenarios.
It sounds like it could be used as a form of manipulation, or like you're giving the other person the illusion that they have control.
It could be used in a negative way if you are very good at these skills. You're right. And, the thing is, though, I feel like in order to be good at these skills, you really have to be into meditation. And I feel like by doing a meditation practice, You have to stay connected to your true self and to your heart. And I feel like many people that follow that path, it's hard to be a negative, manipulative person when you're truly trying to stay connected to your spirit. And so I haven't experienced a lot of high level meditation practitioners that are manipulative. And so I feel like that's possible, but it's not real common.
Hmm. Speaking of connected to your spirit, I would like to talk about the mind, body, spirit, or soul connection. Outside of meditation, how can we feel that connection?
That connection comes from a consistent practice. You have to develop the sensitivity and awareness through consistency. And as a teacher, one of the hardest things that I have to work with new students is getting them to see the value of consistency and to integrate enough self-discipline to do a practice every day. And so I've come up with three questions that I always have new students think about and try to spend some time with when they start a meditation practice. And they are the first one is thinking about your why. Why are you being drawn to meditation? Are you wanting to stay healthy to watch your grandkids grow up and be more mobile into your later years? Or maybe you're dealing with stress or anxiety, or you have panic attacks or some kind of illness, or maybe you're an athlete who's looking to improve their performance on the field, whatever it is. And then not just that surface level why, but if you achieve that and you accomplish that sense of peace or ability to deal with those panic attacks, how is that going to change your life for the better? Are you going to feel confident when you're at the grocery store and feeling like you don't need to get out of there because there's too many people around? Or or maybe you're going to feel better because you can go play with your grandkids and take your dog for a walk. What are all of the reasons how this benefit is going to affect you positively? Then flip the coin, and if you don't do that, think about how all of the negative things that will affect you if you don't accomplish this. Because if you spend some time thinking about this, it's going to give you the energy and the drive to stay on your practice and be consistent, which is the next thing you want to focus on. We're all human. We're going to get up one day where the alarm's going to go off and you're going to say, I'm not going to do my practice today. I'll just hit the snooze button and I'll do it tomorrow. Well, if you get to the point where you see the value in this practice, you stop looking at meditation as a chore you have to do, and you start looking at it as something you get to do. You get excited about it because you see so many benefits from your consistency. And through that consistency, we develop this discipline, this integrity, this perseverance, these qualities that not only affect our meditation practice, but they affect everything else we do in life. And it's extremely powerful how these benefits kind of bleed over into everything we do. And then the third thing that you want to consider as a new practitioner is you need to find yourself a guide. You have to find somebody to help kind of point you down the right direction. I've been studying the meditative arts now for 36 years, and I'm nowhere near the master. I'm just a student. I'm learning all the time. And if you think that as a beginner or intermediate student, you can go out there and teach yourself with any kind of depth, you're going to be spending a lot of time staying around on the surface when we want to learn how to get deep into the practice. And I've seen students come into the academy who have been self-taught, and they're pretty disciplined people. They've been studying the meditative arts for 15, sometimes 20 years, and they'll come into the academy and they'll see somebody who's only been here for a year, who's deeper into their practice because they've had some focused approach. And so while I do think that videos and audios and apps can be helpful to maybe learn techniques here and there, you have to have somebody showing you how to get past the surface, because if all you do is go out there and look on YouTube, you're going to be skating around from this thing to that thing to the next, and you're never going to establish any kind of depth in your practice. So, by thinking about what your why is, coming into it, understanding the importance of consistency, and then finding a good guide and somebody to help point you in the direction, if you do this consistently and stay with it for a year, you'll practice meditation for the rest of your life, because you'll see so many benefits from the practice that it would just be crazy not to continue. And I've seen that here at the academy. I've had thousands of students come through the academy, and the ones that listen when they come in and they do 20 minutes every day of a ritual and integrate some active practices into their life, if they stay with that every day for a year, they'll do this for the rest of their life 95, 97% of the time.
I think this leads well into the next topic I would love to hear your thoughts on. I've heard you talk about how we have two minds. We have the heart mind and we have the monkey mind. And I have a feeling that meditation will help us silence the monkey mind.
Yeah, we already like a little bit kind of touched on this topic when we talked about being distracted in meditation. You know, when you're sitting or doing maybe a Tai Chi form or a Qigong set, that mind's going to race and your emotions are going to get involved. And there's going to be times where you're halfway into your practice and you're going to be saying to yourself, I got to check my texts, or I've got to check my email, or whatever it is. And, that the emotional mind is always trying to distract us and always trying to take us off center. The trick is learning how to use the breath to control the emotional mind. The breath we often look at, it's the banana, and the banana will lead the monkey to behave like we want it to behave. And so when we understand how to use the breath in our lives, we can lead the emotional mind to be a little more balanced and have a little bit more control of what we're doing.
I have never heard that an analogy before, the banana part. That's great. And how can we master our emotions?
This comes through consistency. I think meditation is probably the best vehicle to master our mental ability and our emotions. However, you you need to make it a way of life and not a hobby that you do once in a while. I've heard so many people say that, they're dealing with this problem or that problem, and they're thinking that, when I have a panic attack, I'm going to go do my meditation. It's going to make it go away. And that's kind of like saying, if I want an apple this afternoon, I'm going to go plant a seed this morning and grow a tree. It doesn't work that way. You have to build the foundation, and through that consistency, that's what will lead you to that success with that.
You've written 3 books and you're giving your latest one away, The Yielding Warrior, which we spoke about. How can the listeners get their free copy?
If you go to my website, theyieldingwarrior.com, there's a subpage, theyieldingwarrior.com/book. You can order a free copy of the book. You just pay for shipping and handling. Also at theyieldingwarrior.com, if you're interested in learning how to build an evolving life practice with the meditative arts, we have a 2-week trial where you can go and see what the program's all about there, as well as our teacher training programs where we teach you how to hand down these practices and show people how to basically, write a prescription, if you will, with the meditative arts to give them the practices that they need to help them follow any one of the paths that they choose to cultivate.
I have 2 closing questions I like to ask at the end, but before I do, what is something that we did not talk about today that maybe you've learned that you think is important to share?
In today's fast-paced society, we're so tethered to our telephones and we're so bombarded with distractions that I feel like we walk around often with a mask on. We're trying to shield ourselves from the energy coming in that we don't want, or maybe we're trying to hide certain feelings or emotions that we have and not let people see our true feelings because we don't want to be too vulnerable. Um, when we do this, we get so used to wearing these masks and putting up these barriers that a lot of times when we go to look at ourselves in the mirror, we're still wearing these masks. And the meditative arts is one of those things that helps you stay connected to who you truly are. And so when you are seeing yourself in the mirror, you're really seeing the true you. And I feel like that's something that we could all benefit from, is trying to stay away from those masks, and trying to stay truly connected to who we are.
Mhm. Yes, to your point, I used to be very disciplined when it came to meditation, at least once a day, usually morning and night, and gratitude list, all of the things. And then I got to a point where I thought maybe I don't need to anymore. I think that was, how your ego will play those games. Like, oh, you've reached a point where you don't need to do that. You can maintain the state that you're in. And then it wasn't until recently that I started, dipping my toes back in and meditating a little bit here and there, that I am just beside myself at the difference. And all this time, this gap in between meditating religiously and then stopping, yeah, it makes a world of a difference. And you don't really feel it or notice it unless you're doing it. That's just my personal experience with it.
Yeah, in spiritual, any kind of spiritual practice is funny. We don't really notice the day-to-day benefits so much. I mean, you will feel relaxed after a meditation, or sometimes a little bit of blissful, if you will, but overall, you don't really see the day-to-day changes. What you do see, though, is when you look back 5 years, you look back 10 years, and you've been doing this practice, you're like, wow, I can't believe how far along I've come or what I've realized. And, one of the things that's always been fun for me with the meditative arts is that I will learn something in the practice. And on the surface, it'll seem like, oh, that's easy to understand. I get it, and you'll feel like you have it. But then you'll do this practice and you'll spend hundreds of hours in this practice, and you'll realize that I didn't have a clue. When I first thought I knew what it wasn't this at all. It's really this. And you see it from a whole different perspective. And that's one of the beautiful things I think about the martial arts or the meditative arts, is that it helps you open your perspective and see things from different levels, if you will, and different areas, because your mind's not distracted by emotions where your view gets narrow. It allows you to kind of sit back and open up your peripheral vision and see things from every possible angle. And so it's really powerful in that sense.
Yes. And you can observe yourself. You can step back and watch yourself feel things or look at things a certain way. And you can do it without being in it, which is, to me, the most beneficial and the best part, because you're so close to yourself. You are you. But once you remove yourself from the mind and you can look at it as just awareness, it's almost comical.
Yeah, I think what you just said there is a very valuable thing to make a note of if you're listening, in that these arts improve our awareness and allow us to really see ourselves at a deeper level from more angles. And in doing this, it allows us to make changes, or, focus on areas that we really want to cultivate and watch blossom. And so a lot of times I think people go through life and they don't even recognize half the things they're doing because they're just narrow focused, and not seeing the whole, everything in their peripheral vision. And so the meditative arts really helps, in so many different ways.
Yeah, exactly. Jeff, what is your number one health tip So whether it's mindset, diet, and nutrition, physical, emotional, the one piece of advice you would like everyone to know.
Any kind of health practice, whether it's meditation, whether it's fitness, whether it's diet, it doesn't matter what it is. I think the most important thing is being consistent, not being on a roller coaster and, getting on one of those diets where you lose a few pounds and you gain twice as much as you lost. It's where we have to develop the lifestyle and the consistency. And that's where we see all the true benefits from any practice that we're doing.
For your last question, it's going to be a more personal question. So you choose a number 1 through 100, and that will tell you what it is.
33.
33. What is your favorite way to relax and unwind? You can't say meditation.
I like to be out in nature, whether it's by the river, up in the mountains, or at the beach. I like to just kind of be out of the city, where there's not a lot of people around, and just have time to be quiet and listen to the birds.
Mm, beautiful. Thank you so much, Jeff. This has been very valuable, and I'm excited to share it with the world. And thank you so much for sharing your experience and your wisdom with us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode with Jeff Patterson, make sure to subscribe and come back next week for another conversation with another amazing guest. And thank you for being you.